From the moment my wife and I got married, we knew we wanted a child sooner rather than later. We dreamed of raising a little one of our own, but despite our best efforts, nothing seemed to work. My wife couldn't get pregnant, and it felt like everyone around us was starting families while we were left with nothing. She wasn't interested in adopting, though. She wanted a child that was hers by blood. As time passed, the pressure wore on her. She became more and more withdrawn, and I could see how much it hurt her not to have a child. I hated seeing her like that, and I felt this constant ache in my chest because I couldn't give her the one thing she wanted most. Eventually, she gave in. We agreed to adopt. I tried my best to lift her spirits on the drive to the doctor's appointment before heading to the adoption center, but she wasn't having it. She didn't say a word or even look at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the quiet tears streaming down her face. When we got to the doctor's office, we checked in and sat down in the waiting area. There was a man in the far corner, and it didn't take long for me to notice him staring at us. His dark blonde hair and bright green eyes stood out, but it was the way he was looking at us that felt off. He stared right at me, and I couldn't help but feel like something was wrong. After a few minutes, the man stood up and made his way over to us. He was tall, probably around 6 feet 5 inches, and built like someone who worked out regularly. As he approached, he spoke in a deep, almost sinister voice. "Having some trouble, Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" My wife looked up at him, confusion written all over her face, and then glanced at me. "Sorry, do we know you?" she asked. He let out a soft laugh and then extended his hand. "No, but allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ethan Parker, though most people know me as Lazarus." Neither of us knew what to make of it, so we both shook his hand. I asked, "Can we help you with something?" He looked at me with a serious expression. "Actually, it's not help that I need. It's you." At this point, my wife was getting frustrated. "Listen, creep, just tell us what you want and leave us alone," she snapped. The man didn't seem bothered at all. He stared at her for a long moment, and I noticed her starting to shake. Finally, he spoke again, this time in a calm, deliberate tone. "I know about your struggles, the things you've been through trying to have a child. What if I told you I could help?" My wife and I exchanged a look of confusion. How the hell did he know about our situation? After a long, awkward silence, I asked, "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "I'm a servant of a higher power." "No, not God. The one you know as Satan." I opened my mouth to respond, but he raised a hand to silence me. "I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. I'm not here to hurt you. Neither is my master. We're here to help. We've watched you both suffer, and we want to ease that pain. I've seen how much this has torn you apart. I'm here to help lift that burden. Nothing more." I couldn't process what he was saying. I was stuck, frozen in disbelief. I glanced over at my wife, who hadn't moved. Her eyes were locked on the man, and she looked almost hypnotized. He spoke again, as though he could sense our hesitation. "I understand this is hard to believe, but know that we only wish to help you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bottle. The liquid inside was a shimmering purple, and if you looked closely, you could see little flecks of light sparkling within it. He handed it to my wife. "I know how desperately you want a child. I've seen the pain you've gone through, the sleepless nights, and the tears you've cried when no one was looking." He held the bottle out in front of her face. "Drink this, and everything you've dreamed of will be yours." I watched in disbelief as my wife stared at the bottle. Then, to my shock, she reached out and grabbed it. Before I could stop her, I blurted out, "Emily, don't listen to this guy. He's out of his mind. That could be dangerous for all we know. We can still have a child, even if they're not ours by blood. We'll love them just the same." She looked at the bottle for a moment, hesitating. Then the man spoke again. "It's your choice, Emily. You can have a child of your own, or you can have someone else's." I felt my heart race as I watched her open the bottle. Without another word, she drank it all in one swift gulp. My blood ran cold when I saw her collapse onto the floor. "What did you do to her?" I screamed, rushing toward the man and grabbing him by his shirt. He didn't flinch, just smiled calmly. "She'll be fine. Let her rest. The potion will take effect soon." I didn't know what to do. I punched him as hard as I could, but when my fist hit him, it felt like I'd struck a brick wall. Pain shot through my hand, and I felt my bones crack. I dropped to my knees, unable to breathe from the agony. When I looked up again, the man was gone. Nurses rushed over, and I heard one of them calling 911. Ignoring the pain in my hand, I ran to my wife's side, pressing my ear to her chest. I could feel her heartbeat. Relief washed over me, and I whispered in her ear, "You'll be okay, Emily. Everything's going to be okay." After we got to the hospital, the doctors immediately took my wife for a scan, and as expected, they had to check on my hand too. It was broken. They got me a cast, and then led me to where they were examining Emily. Once the scan was done, the doctor came to me with good news. "She's okay. No brain damage or any other major issues," he assured me. They placed her in a room, but they told me I should go home and rest. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied firmly, my mind made up. That night, I tried to sleep in her room, but it was impossible. I couldn't stop thinking about what that man had said to us. Let the potion do its work. His words haunted me. I looked at Emily, peacefully asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady. Despite my mind racing, exhaustion finally won, and I drifted off. But when I woke up, I found her sitting up, staring out the window. "Emily," I hurried to her side, heart racing. She turned toward me, her smile a little uncertain. "I heard you broke your hand. Are you all right?" "I've fine. What about you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled back and kissed me gently. Just then, the doctor walked in, and his expression was full of awe. "She's doing great," he said. "We ran another scan, and you're going to be a father. She's pregnant." My world stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Wait, what?" I muttered. "How?" The doctor shrugged in wonder. "I don't know. It's incredible, but she's pregnant." I stared at Emily, and she was crying tears of joy. I was happy for her, of course, but I was in shock. The potion, I thought. It worked. But how? The questions flooded my mind, but I pushed them away, focusing instead on the reality of what was happening. Our dream was finally coming true. I was going to be a father. The next few months flew by in a blur of excitement and preparation. Emily was glowing, full of life again, and I was right there beside her every step of the way. We converted the spare room into a nursery, picked out toys, and bought a crib. During one of our final checkups, the doctor told us it was a boy. We painted the nursery blue and made sure everything was perfect. As the due date got closer, the excitement grew. Then, one Saturday morning at 9:36, Emily's water broke. We rushed to the hospital, and I waited outside her room for what felt like forever. Finally, a nurse came out and led me inside. "Are you ready to meet your son?" she asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. "I've never been more ready," I replied, trying to hold back my nerves. The nurse stepped out, leaving us alone, and there she was, Emily, holding our baby boy. He was asleep in her arms, but as I walked in, he stirred and opened his eyes. He didn't cry, though. Emily just looked down at him, tears streaming down her face. "Our son," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. I felt tears filling my own eyes as I leaned in to look at him. "He's perfect," I said, my voice breaking. "Do you want to hold him?" Emily asked. "Yes, please," I said. Carefully, Emily handed me our son. He looked up at me, those big, brown eyes taking me in, as if studying me. His little face was round, and his cheeks were chubby. He was small, but not too small. As I gazed at him, at Emily, and at the life we had just created together, a voice broke the silence from the corner of the room. "Congratulations. It's wonderful to see you both so happy." We both turned, startled, to see the man from before. His dark blonde hair shimmered in the dim light, and his piercing green eyes gleamed. He walked over and stood beside me, gazing down at our son. "He's beautiful, and he's got your eyes," he said, nodding toward me. "Yeah, thank you for everything," I said, still trying to process all of this. The man raised an eyebrow. "Of course. I'm here to make the world a better place for people like you. But I suppose you're wondering why I'm here now." Before I could say anything, he pulled out a crumpled letter from his jacket pocket and handed it to Emily. "The child will be healthy and everything will be fine," he said, his voice almost too calm. "As long as you follow the rules in this envelope." I knew it. Something didn't feel right. I watched Emily carefully open the envelope. As she read the rules, I felt my stomach drop with every word. Rule number 1. The child must be named Lazarus and cannot be called anything else. Rule number 2. Never look at the child while he's eating. Rule number 3. He must never attend school or play with other children. He won't get along with them. Rule number 4. The child must be in bed by 10 p.m. sharp, without exception. Rule number 5. On his birthday, he must stay in his room, no matter what. Rule number 6. If you ever hear screaming from his room, do not go in. Rule number 7. If his eyes ever turn yellow, leave the room immediately. Rule number 8. When he turns 15, he must be chained outside. If you fail to do so, may God have mercy on your soul. Rule number 9. If he is not chained outside on his 15th birthday, you must kill him. We stared at the list, numb. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. How could this be happening? What kind of monster were we dealing with? Our son? Chained up? His eyes turning yellow? What had we done? We looked at the tiny, perfect baby in my arms, completely unaware of the horrors that lay ahead. This wasn't just a miracle. It was a curse, and we had no idea how we were going to escape it. Emily then looked up and said in a loud, angry voice to the man, "What the hell is this? Is this some kind of sick joke?" The man said in a deep, serious voice, "This is no joke. Those rules must be followed no matter what." We looked down at the list as I said, "Why? What did you do to our child? Did you curse him?" I asked, as we looked up and saw the man was gone. We were speechless, looking at each other before Emily took a hold of my hand and said, "David, I think we have to listen to these rules." "Why? This list is so bizarre. It can't be real," I said. She was silent before she said, "David, we have a child in our hands that the doctor told us we would never have. How much more bizarre can this get?" She was right. I looked down at the rules again and sighed. "Okay, well, let's start with the first rule," I said. I looked down at my son and said, "Hello, Lazarus." The child looked up as soon as I said its name and opened its eyes wide, then started to giggle. Emily and I stared at Lazarus before Emily said, "Well, how hard can these rules be?" Lazarus grew up to be a smart and intelligent kid. Emily homeschooled him and taught him well. By the time he was 8, he was already doing fairly advanced math and other subjects. We followed the rules with our lives. Most of the rules were simple. We always called him Lazarus, and we never looked at him when he ate. He was homeschooled, and we didn't live near any kids his age, so we never had to worry about rule number 3 or rule number 4 either. We didn't like rule number 5 because Lazarus started to cry and get upset that he would have to stay in his room during his birthday. He surprisingly never argued about that rule, but we hated that we had to lock him away on a day that should have been celebrated. The only rule that became a problem was number 6. When Lazarus turned 12, he screamed almost every night. He screamed so loud, it felt like the house was shaking. We had to buy earplugs just so we could sleep at night, but even those didn't help. He screamed for about a month or 2 before finally calming down. After that, life went back to normal. I never experienced rule number 7, but Emily did. One day, when she was home alone with him in the kitchen, she turned to see Lazarus staring at her with bright yellow eyes. Emily said she ran out of the kitchen so fast, like her life was on the line. She had the feeling she was being chased, but she never heard footsteps behind her. When she waited a minute or 2, she went back into the kitchen to see Lazarus reading a book. He looked up at her, and she said her heart stopped for a moment before she saw his eyes were normal again. Lazarus was a normal kid overall and never showed weird signs of any kind. Once he turned 13, though, we noticed some things. They were small but definitely visible. He got angry quicker, and he seemed more aggressive with everything. He also started to growl in his sleep, a low, deep growl that woke me and Emily up a lot. Rules 3 and 4 started to become harder now as Lazarus started to rebel against us. "Why can't I go to school and hang out with kids my age?" he would frequently say in an angry tone. "Because you can't, son. You wouldn't get along with the kids." I would say, "That's bullshit, Dad. I just want some friends of my own. I want to be normal." I would never know what to say after that. I couldn't tell him about the list of rules because I knew he wouldn't listen to them. Rules were the last thing on his mind now. We started to become afraid as his 15th birthday began to roll around. I went to Home Depot and bought the strongest chain I could. When I brought it home, Emily panicked, thinking it was too much for Lazarus to be chained up outside. We already locked him up on his birthday. Now we have to chain him up like a dog outside? Emily said, yelling at me. We have to follow these rules. If we don't, I'm afraid of what will happen to us and to him, I said in an anxious voice. She still wasn't happy. That whole week, I would hear her crying in her sleep every night. I did feel bad for our son, but I knew, and she knew, what would happen if we didn't follow that rule. The night before Lazarus turned 15, he said to us as we were eating dinner, "Why don't we ever celebrate my birthday?" Emily and I froze as we heard this. We knew this question would come up eventually and tried to come up with an answer, but we couldn't. Emily spoke first. "Lazarus, just because we don't celebrate your birthday doesn't mean we don't love you." Lazarus then spoke in an angry tone. "You didn't answer my question. Why the hell don't we ever celebrate my birthday?" Emily was silent now. I finally spoke up. "We just can't, son. We can't tell you why, and I know that may upset you, and we're sorry, but we just can't celebrate your birthday." Lazarus was silent before he spoke in a much angrier tone. "You can't tell me why? That's your best excuse? Can you not tell me either why I'm locked in my damn room the whole day?" "And no, Lazarus," Emily said. "Screw you guys. I hate you," Lazarus said, slamming his hand on the table before running upstairs. Emily broke down now, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to comfort her, but she pushed me away. "Our son hates us, David, because of those stupid rules. It's not fair for us or him," she said, running upstairs to try to talk to Lazarus. I was alone now at the table, tears starting to form in my eyes. I knew there would be a cost. Anyone who works for evil doesn't want to help this world. He wants to make it worse. At 11 that night, I went into Lazarus's room. I picked him up from his bed and brought him outside into the shed we had in our backyard. I tied the chain around him and wrapped it against the table in the shed. To be safe, I also locked the shed door when I was done. I went inside and looked at the time, which now read 11:37 p.m. I went to bed and drifted off to sleep. I woke up to screaming from outside. I turned to my side to see Emily was not in bed. I panicked and ran downstairs out into the backyard. I saw Emily on the ground, crying in fear. I ran over to her as she said, "I'm sorry, David. I just couldn't leave him alone. I wanted him to know we care about him and that he's not alone," she said in tears. I turned to the shed, which was violently banging around. Then we heard the chain snap inside. Oh no, only a matter of time until he breaks the lock. I helped Emily to her feet as we ran inside before we heard the lock snap off right behind us. We ran upstairs and into our room. We could hear fast footsteps approaching. We looked around to see where we could hide and decided on our closet. We ran and hid inside just as we heard the door bust open. We could hear growling as we saw Lazarus through the gap in the closet door. That is not our son, I thought. What I saw was a creature that resembled a goblin with a small hunch on its back and glowing yellow eyes. It was crawling on all fours and growling like a wolf. Emily was shaking in fear as I held her close to me. She was sobbing, and I had to put my hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. The creature that was our son was crawling around the room, looking under the bed and all around. Its eyes then went to the closet. "Please don't come here," I thought. The creature slowly started to crawl towards the closet, and I could see its glowing yellow eyes staring almost right at me. I looked around and thought fast. I grabbed a couple of blankets on the floor and flipped them over me and Emily. We heard the closet creak open slowly. We held our breath as the growls started to get closer to us. We could see the face of the creature as it pressed against the blankets. It got closer and closer, and we backed up as far as we could. Then, by some miracle, the face backed off, and we could hear it crawling away into the other room. We were silent and didn't dare move. Somehow we managed to fall asleep in the closet with the blanket still over us. We woke up and didn't move until we saw the sunlight outside. We walked out of the closet slowly and started to look around the house for Lazarus. The house was a disaster. Glasses and cabinets were broken, and almost all the windows were shattered. We called out for Lazarus but got nothing in response. We searched all day for him until we eventually called the police and reported him missing. We were heartbroken. Our son was gone, and if he came back in the form he was in, we would have to kill him, our beloved son. That night, as we were about to go to bed, we heard a knock at the door. Emily ran downstairs before I could stop her. I ran down right behind her, and when she opened the door, she stood still like a statue. I ran over to the door and saw someone I prayed I would never see again. It was the man, the original Lazarus. He looked down at us and said in a deep, hardened voice, "I gave you a child, and all I asked for in return was for you to follow the rules I gave you." Neither of us could speak as we were still in shock. The man spoke again. "I'm not here to punish you. That is not my job. I'm here to warn you. You broke the most important rule. Now you have let out a monster into this world." Emily yelled at the man. "Why did you give us that list? You ruined our son's life. I know my son, and I know he is not a monster. He needs us now more than ever." "Did you not read the rules?" he asked in a calm voice. "Of course we did," Emily said. "You know what will happen then. That thing out there now is not your son. You know what you must do, and I hope you make the right decision." The man then turned and walked away slowly. Emily slammed the door shut and started to cry again. "I can't, David. I can't kill our son," she said. "We have to, Emily. We messed up, and people will die if we don't kill him," I said. She looked down with tears in her eyes. Then she looked up at me and nodded slowly. "We knew he would come back. We just didn't know when." The next day, I went to the gun shop nearby and bought a shotgun and ammo. I knew we were going to need it. We stayed up that night and waited by the door. There was nothing. We waited for hours and hours. By that time, Emily was now fast asleep, and I started to drift off as well. Before I did, though, I heard a voice outside, "Mom? Dad?" I jolted wide awake now. "He's here." Emily woke up as soon as she heard the voice too, and started to head toward the door. I stopped her before she opened it. "That is not him, Emily. Don't listen to it." She looked at me, then at the door, as we heard another voice outside. "Mom, I'm cold. I want to go inside. I miss you guys, and I'm sorry that I yelled at you." It almost fooled me. I even started to reach for the door handle before reality kicked in, and I stopped myself. Before I could even stop her, Emily flung the door open. I pointed my shotgun, expecting to see the monster I saw a couple of days ago. I gasped as I saw Lazarus. He was completely normal-looking now. Emily ran and gave him a hug. I sensed something was wrong, though. Lazarus didn't even flinch or acknowledge Emily in the slightest. He only looked down at the ground. Then I saw him look up at me and saw the glowing yellow eyes. "Emily, get away from him!" I yelled, pointing the shotgun at the monster. Emily didn't listen to me and continued hugging Lazarus, kissing him on the head. In a swift motion, the creature grabbed Emily and bit into her throat. I heard Emily try to scream, but she couldn't. Blood squirted out of her throat as she crawled toward me. I'm sorry," she gasped before she stopped moving and lay motionless on the ground. I looked up to see the creature staring at me with its yellow eyes. Then it smiled, showing its razor-sharp teeth covered in blood. I fired a quick shot at it and ran toward the backyard. I ran into the shed, where I could hear the creature crawling right behind me. I made it into the shed just in time as I heard a loud bang when I closed the door. I held the door as I heard the creature banging on it. I tried with all my might to keep the door closed, but I couldn't. Then I spotted a spare lock I had in the shed and quickly locked the door with it. The creature banged and banged. Slowly, I saw the lock starting to break. No. It can't end like this. I started to cry now, knowing my fate was sealed. I then looked down at the shotgun and thought, if I'm going to die, I'm now going out without a fight. The creature gave another hard bang at the door before the lock gave out. I cocked the gun back and pointed it at the creature. As the door swung open, the creature stepped inside, its yellow eyes glowing brighter than ever. Its smile stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. My heart pounded as I raised the shotgun, hands shaking from the adrenaline and fear. "Please, please, God," I whispered under my breath. I was ready to pull the trigger, but something inside me, some last shred of hope, kept me frozen, waiting for the perfect moment. The creature didn't move immediately. It just stood there, its head tilted slightly, almost as if it were studying me. Its breath was deep and heavy, like a growl that reverberated through my chest. "You can't stop me," the creature whispered, its voice distorted, echoing in the shed. It sounded like Lazarus, but warped, as if the real Lazarus was trapped inside, screaming to break free. "Get away from me," I yelled, stepping back as it took a slow, deliberate step forward. My fingers tightened around the shotgun. I had no choice now. If I didn't act, I wouldn't survive. In one swift motion, I aimed and pulled the trigger. The blast of the shotgun shook the room, sending debris flying everywhere. The creature screeched in pain, stumbling backward. I thought I saw something, just for a second, something that resembled the real Lazarus in its eyes, pleading for help. But the moment was fleeting. It wasn't Lazarus anymore. It was something else, something I could no longer recognize. The creature lunged at me with frightening speed, knocking the shotgun from my hands. My heart raced as I scrambled to the back of the shed, trying to find anything I could use as a weapon. My mind was reeling, and my body felt numb from the terror. The creature came at me again, but this time, I grabbed a rusty crowbar from the corner and swung it with all my might. It connected with the creature's face, causing it to stagger backward. For a moment, I saw the creature pause, blinking in confusion. But it was only for a moment. It came at me again, but I was quicker this time. I swung the crowbar again, hitting it across the chest. The impact knocked it off balance, and I took the opportunity to run to the door. As I opened it, the creature let out a screech, furious and relentless. It charged, but I managed to slam the door shut behind me, locking it. I backed away, breathing heavily. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't think straight, could barely even process what was happening. My mind raced as I looked around the backyard. There was no way I could keep running. I had to make a stand. For Emily. For everything we had lost. I turned to the side and saw the tool shed, where I had hidden a second gun, just in case. I wasn't going to let the creature win. I couldn't let it take everything from me. With the crowbar still in hand, I ran to the shed, opened the door, and grabbed the second shotgun. It was heavy, but I didn't care. I was done running. I wasn't going to wait for it to come to me this time. If I wanted to finish what it started, it would have to come through me first. The creature was already at the door again. It was relentless. There was no reasoning with it anymore. Only one of us was leaving this place alive. I took a deep breath and steadied the gun. As the creature approached, I fired, aiming at its chest. The blast sent it stumbling back, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't dead. Not yet. It looked at me with those glowing yellow eyes, and this time, I saw nothing but rage and hunger in them. It let out another screech, and it lunged at me with inhuman speed. But this time, I was ready. I pulled the trigger again. The creature fell to the ground, writhing in pain as I fired a third shot. This time, it didn't get back up. The shed was silent, except for the sound of my heavy breathing. I lowered the gun, feeling both relief and overwhelming grief. I had done what needed to be done, but at what cost? I walked over to the creature's body, but as I got closer, I saw something I hadn't expected. The creature's form started to shimmer, like smoke, and for a brief moment, I could see a flicker of Lazarus. The real Lazarus. His face, pale and frightened, flashed before my eyes, as if reaching out for one last chance to escape the monster he had become. The shimmer faded, and the body became still. I didn't know what that meant, whether Lazarus had truly been lost, or if there was still hope. But I didn't have the answers. I couldn't bring him back. I dropped to my knees, exhausted and broken. Tears welled in my eyes, but I had no more strength to cry. Emily was gone. My son was gone, and I was alone with the consequences of the choices we had made. I knew what I had to do next, but I didn't know if I could face it. The world had changed, and I wasn't sure if I would ever feel safe again. The rules had been broken, and the price was too high to ever undo. I closed my eyes, not knowing what the future held, but knowing this, whatever came next, I had to survive. For the people I had lost, and for the hope that maybe, just maybe, the world could be saved from the darkness that had taken my son.